What if I told you that one moment of fear, one act of cowardice was enough to erase an entire Native American tribe from history? Not famine, not disease, not war, but a single man's failure in the moment of truth. Tonight, we uncover how one warrior's weakness doomed his people and the forgotten lessons it left for us today. When most people picture Native Americans, they imagine fearless warriors charging into battle with painted faces and eagle-feathered headdresses. But the truth was far more complex. Life in the old world was built on balance between courage and fear, loyalty and betrayal, strength and weakness. Tribes weren't just bands of fighters. They were communities of engineers, healers, hunters, and storytellers. They survived brutal winters, scorching summers, and relentless enemies by trusting one another completely. Trust was the glue of survival. But what happens when that trust shatters? What happens when the person everyone depends on, the warrior standing at the front, runs instead of fights? This isn't a story about nameless people in a distant past. It's a story about survival, about courage, about loyalty, and about what happens when all of that is lost in a single breath. And along the way, we'll dive into the homes they built, the rituals they lived by, the weapons they carried, the animals they honored, and the myths that guided them. Hidden inside these traditions is a wisdom that feels strangely modern, maybe even more advanced than we realize today. But remember this: in the end, it wasn't cold, hunger, or an outside army that erased them. It was one man's cowardice. To understand how one man's cowardice destroyed his people, we first need to understand just how much knowledge and ingenuity went into keeping a tribe alive. Survival wasn't luck, it was design. Take the tipi, for example. Outsiders saw only a cone-shaped tent, but for Plains tribes, it was a masterpiece. 20-foot poles locked together like the ribs of a giant skeleton, heavy buffalo hides stretched tight over the frame, stitched carefully so wind and snow couldn't creep inside. A flap at the top worked like a chimney, letting smoke escape while heat stayed in, and the whole structure could be packed up in under an hour, loaded on a horse, and moved across the prairie. Modern campers brag about instant tents, but tipis were the original portable homes. Farther east, the Iroquois built longhouses, massive wooden halls, sometimes stretching over 100 feet. They could hold dozens of families, with shared fires glowing down the center. Privacy was minimal, but unity was everything. In the desert, the Pueblo carved entire villages into cliffs, turning stone into fortress walls. In the frozen north, the Inuit shaped snow into igloos, domes so perfectly engineered that body heat alone could keep them warm inside. Each shelter was a scientific response to the environment. No electricity, no concrete, no steel, just wood, bone, hide, and stone, woven into survival by centuries of trial and error. Ask yourself, could you design a home today that keeps you warm without a heater, cool without a sea, and safe without locks? They could, but survival wasn't only about shelter. Clothing mattered just as much. Imagine facing a winter storm on the plains. The temperature plunges below zero. The wind cuts like knives. Modern gear companies sell $500 parkas for these conditions. The tribes had something better: buffalo hides, thick, insulating, and nearly indestructible. A single buffalo robe could keep a person alive through nights so cold that breath froze in midair. Shoes, not sneakers, moccasins, soft leather, flexible, and easily repaired. They weren't waterproof like rubber boots, but they allowed silent movement through forest or snow. In the Southwest, cotton was woven into cool, breathable clothing. In the forests, deerskin became tunics, leggings, and gloves. Function first, but always decorated with meaning. Beads, feathers, and dyed patterns turned daily wear into living art, carrying stories and identity. And then, the tools. To us, a knife is a piece of steel bought at a store. To them, It was a lifeline, carved from stone, bone, or obsidian, sharp enough to slice flesh cleaner than metal. Bows weren't toys, they were hunting rifles of the ancient world, crafted with precision. A well-made bow could drop a deer at 50 yards. Arrows were fletched with eagle or hawk feathers for balance. Even fire, the most basic tool, was engineered with skill, with bow drills, flint, and tinder carefully prepared. Tribes could spark flames in conditions where most modern campers would fail. Fire wasn't just warmth, it was safety from predators. It was cooking. It was survival. Here's the key: nothing was wasted. The buffalo wasn't just food. Its bones became tools. Its sinew became bowstrings. Its bladder became water containers. Its horns became cups and spoons. Even its dung fueled fires when wood was scarce. Compare that to us, throwing away mountains of plastic after a single use. Who really lived more advanced? But here's where cowardice becomes dangerous. Survival wasn't built on shelters, clothing, or tools alone. It was built on trust. One hunter brought back meat, another stitched hides, another built shelters. The system only worked if everyone did their part. So imagine this: a tribe braves the winter, counting on a warrior to protect the hunt, to face danger when it comes. But what happens when he runs? What happens when fear breaks the chain? Because in a world this harsh, one act of cowardice doesn't just shame a man, it can doom everyone who depends on him. If you stepped into a native village hundreds of years ago, you wouldn't find chaos. You'd find rhythm, a rhythm as steady as the sun rising and the drum beating. Life was built around routines, traditions, and rituals that bound people together as tightly as the poles of a tipi dot at dawn. Smoke curled from cooking fires. Children played outside while elders watched carefully, always ready to teach through a story or a sharp word. Women tanned hides, tended fires, or decorated clothing with beads and porcupine quills. Men repaired bows, checked traps, or planned the hunt. Everyone's hands had purpose. Meals weren't just about filling the stomach. They were about giving thanks. Before meat, corn, beans, or squash was eaten, a prayer was offered. To the deer, to the buffalo, to the earth, to the Creator. Gratitude was more than politeness, it was survival. Forget gratitude, forget balance, and you risked losing the very things you depended on. Family was everything, but it wasn't always the mom, dad, kids picture we think of today. A child belonged to the whole tribe. A grandmother could scold or praise as easily as a parent. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone shared the work of raising, teaching, and protecting the young. Imagine a world where a child always had dozens of hands ready to hold them safe. And then there were the great passages of life. Boys fasted alone on vision quests, seeking dreams of animal guides that would shape their destiny. Girls celebrated womanhood in ceremonies filled with song, dance, and blessing. Warriors painted their faces with symbols drawn from the spirits before battle. Every step in life had ritual meaning. At night, the fire became a classroom. Elders told stories of tricksters and heroes, of animals that talked, of ancestors who sacrificed. These weren't just entertainment. They were survival lessons wrapped in myth. A story about a greedy trickster warned children not to hoard food. A story about a proud hunter reminded everyone that arrogance brought disaster. And the drum was never just music. Its beat was the heartbeat of the world itself. When it sounded, people didn't just hear it, they felt it in their bones. Songs weren't for applause. They were calls to the spirits, to the animals, to the ancestors. But inside this harmony was always one expectation: courage. The stories praised bravery, mocked cowardice, and honored sacrifice. A warrior was expected to stand firm for the people, even at the cost of his life. Because without that courage, everything, the homes, the food, the children, the future was at risk. Now imagine what happens when one man fails, when a warrior, raised on stories of bravery, painted in sacred symbols, carrying the pride of his people, meets danger and runs. It isn't just his shame, it's his family's, it's his tribe's. And in a world where trust was survival, one coward's choice could spark disaster, and that is exactly where our story leads, because in the moments where courage was needed most, one man's fear would unravel everything his people had built for centuries. Survival often depended on more than hunting or farming. It depended on defending the people. Every warrior carried not only weapons, but the heavy weight of responsibility. The bow was the rifle of the ancient world, crafted from wood and sinew, strung with cords made from animal gut. It could fire arrows with deadly precision, arrowheads chipped from flint or obsidian sliced cleaner than steel. To a hunter, the bow meant food. To a warrior, it meant survival. Spears served double duty as well, used in fishing rivers and also in the clash of battle. War clubs, carved from hardwood and inlaid with stone, were brutal in close combat. And then there was the tomahawk, both tool and weapon, carried everywhere, used for chopping wood one moment and defense the next. But weapons alone didn't win battles. Skill, courage, and unity did. A warrior wasn't just a fighter, he was a protector. When he stepped into battle, he carried the lives of women, children, and elders on his shoulders, and every man beside him had to trust that he would stand firm. Before battle, warriors prepared not only their weapons, but their spirits. They painted their faces with symbols of power. Some fasted or prayed, asking for strength and clarity. To outsiders, this may look like superstition, but for the people, it was armor for the soul. A coward might carry the sharpest arrow, but without courage, it meant nothing. And here's where the danger lay, because courage wasn't optional, it was expected. To turn and run wasn't just weakness, it was betrayal. Imagine being in the middle of a fight, your life in danger, trusting the man beside you. Then he falters. He turns. He flees. The line breaks. Suddenly, everyone is vulnerable. Panic spreads faster than arrows fly. History tells us that battles were often small raids, ambushes, skirmishes, but their impact was enormous. A single failed raid could mean hunger in the winter. A lost fight could mean losing hunting grounds or allies. One cowardly act in the chaos of battle could turn victory into destruction. And betrayal didn't always come from the enemy. Sometimes it came from within. Scouts who revealed camp locations, allies who abandoned agreements at the last moment, warriors who froze or fled, leaving their brothers to die. In a world where every hand counted, the loss of one could tip the scale. Think about it. What is more terrifying? Facing an enemy you've never met, or realizing the man who swore to protect you has already run? That is the weight of cowardice. It doesn't just endanger the warrior himself. It endangers everyone. His family, his village, his people. Weapons could cut, arrows could pierce, but cowardice could unravel an entire tribe. And this is where the heart of our story begins to darken, because one warrior's act of fear didn't just shame him. It opened the door to destruction. It turned trust into doubt. It turned strength into weakness, and in the chapters ahead, we'll see how even nature itself seemed to turn against a people once cowardice infected their ranks. Because when courage fails, survival itself begins to crumble. To native peoples, animals weren't just creatures of the wild. They were teachers, guides, and sometimes even protectors. Survival meant more than learning from the land, it meant honoring it. The eagle, for example, wasn't just admired for its flight. Its feathers were sacred, carried only by those who proved bravery. An eagle feather wasn't a decoration. It was a medal of honor, a visible sign that a man had stood firm in battle or sacrifice. When an eagle soared overhead, it wasn't just wings in the sky, it was a messenger, carrying prayers to the Creator. The buffalo was life itself on the plains. Food, shelter, clothing, tools all came from its body. To kill a buffalo was to take a gift from the earth, and it was done with ceremony and respect. Wasting the animal was unthinkable, and cowardice in the hunt, that was more than weakness, it was betrayal. Because if the hunters failed, the entire village suffered. Wolves, too, held lessons. A pack hunted with unity, each member fulfilling a role. The alpha lead, the others followed, not in fear, but in cooperation. A lone wolf might survive for a time, but a pack thrived because of loyalty. Warriors were taught to see themselves the same way, to break from the group, to run when danger came. That was to abandon the pack. Even the bear, feared for its power, was honored as a healer. Tribes noticed how bears ate roots and herbs when sick. Medicine men studied them, learning cures from the animals themselves. The bear embodied strength, endurance, and protection. To show cowardice against such a spirit was to invite shame. Every animal carried wisdom. The coyote warned against trickery and selfishness. The deer taught gentleness and alertness. The salmon showed determination, fighting upstream against impossible odds. These lessons weren't fairy tales, they were survival codes written into the natural world. Now, imagine how those lessons shaped courage. A warrior with eagle feathers was expected to live up to the eagle's bravery. A hunter who failed the buffalo hunt carried the guilt of starving his people. A man compared to a wolf was praised for loyalty, but a coward was worse than a lone wolf. He wasn't just weak. He was a danger to the entire pack. When cowardice entered the heart of a warrior, it wasn't only a personal failure. It broke the bond with the spirits, with the animals, with the land. A coward betrayed more than his people, he betrayed creation itself. Think of the shame, to stand in a circle of warriors, each painted in sacred symbols, each holding feathers or talismans earned in moments of courage. To know that you ran when they stood firm, to feel the eyes of the tribe, the ancestors, even the animals themselves, heavy on your back. Because to betray courage wasn't just to lose honor, it was to break the sacred order of survival. And this is where our story sharpens even further. For one warrior, cowardice didn't just mean shame. It opened the door to destruction. It invited disaster from enemies and from nature alike. In the next chapter, we step into the heart of native spirituality, the myths and beliefs that shaped courage itself. And there, we'll see how one man's fear became more than weakness. It became a curse that unraveled his people forever. For native peoples, life was not divided between the ordinary and the sacred. Everything was sacred. The river, the fire, the hunt, the battle, each pulsed with spirit. To live meant walking in constant relationship with the unseen world. The Great Spirit, the Creator, was above all. But the earth was alive with countless other powers. Ancestors watched from beyond. Animal guides walked alongside the people. Trickster spirits tested their choices. Every act, whether hunting, dancing, or fighting, was seen by more than human eyes. Myths carried these truths. They were not bedtime stories. They were codes of survival. The coyote trickster, sly and greedy, showed the dangers of selfishness. The eagle, soaring high, taught courage and vision. The spider, weaving patiently, showed that creation required care and time. Each tale was a mirror, reminding the people of who they must be. And courage was everywhere in these stories. Heroes braved monsters, storms, and rival tribes. Sacrifice was honored above all. To die protecting one's people was not tragedy, was glory. The coward, however, was not forgotten. Myths warned of him, the one who turned away, who betrayed trust, who broke the sacred chain of courage. His fate was always the same: shame, exile, or destruction. Why? Because cowardice was not just weakness. It was spiritual betrayal. To run from battle was to insult the eagle's gift of feathers. To refuse the hunt was to dishonor the buffalo. To break unity was to mock the wolf. A coward wasn't only failing his tribe, he was breaking faith with the universe itself. And this mattered, because survival depended on harmony. Gratitude to the land kept food abundant. Respect for spirits kept balance in nature. Courage in danger kept enemies at bay. One crack in that harmony could spread like fire. If the spirits withdrew their blessing, hunts failed, rivers dried, enemies pressed harder. Now picture this: a warrior, painted in sacred colors, carrying a feather that symbolized courage, stands in battle. The enemy charges. His brothers brace themselves, and then he falters. He flees. In that instant, he betrays not only his people, but the spirits that gave him strength. His cowardice is not a private sin. It is a curse, dragging his people into disaster, and history whispers of such curses. Tribes weakened after leaders ignored visions. Villages collapsed after rituals were broken. Elders warned again and again, break the sacred order, and destruction follows. So what happens when one warrior, in a single moment of fear, breaks everything? When his cowardice is so great it dooms his entire tribe? That is the turning point of our story. Because in the next chapter, we leave myths behind and enter the harsh reality of survival itself, the seasonal movements that kept tribes alive. And there, we'll see how one man's cowardice turned the cycle of life into the end of a people. Survival, for native peoples, was never static. It was a dance with the seasons. Spring, summer, fall, winter, each one demanded change. Each one required courage. On the plains, tribes followed the buffalo. In spring, they moved toward calving grounds. Summer took them to wide grasslands. Fall meant great hunts to store meat for the cold months. Winter camps were chosen for shelter from brutal winds. Each move was a careful decision, guided by elders who remembered every river bend, every hidden valley. In the forests, the rhythm was different. Spring meant fishing swollen rivers, nets heavy with salmon. Summer was for berries and plants. Fall for deer and elk. Winter for storytelling and ceremony. No season was wasted. Each had its purpose. In the southwest, Pueblo peoples planted crops: corn, beans, squash timed to rare rains. Storage pits and stone houses preserved food for the dry months. Ritual dances called for rain and honored the turning of the year. Even in the desert, life had rhythm. But here's the truth: this balance was fragile. Miss a hunt, and winter meant hunger. Fail to move in time, and storms could trap the people. Courage wasn't optional, it was the fuel that kept the cycle moving. A coward in the hunt, a coward in the migration, a coward in the defense of food stores. He could bring ruin to everyone. Trading routes connected tribes across vast distances. Shells from the ocean traveled inland. Obsidian from the mountains reached the plains. Copper from the north reached the south. These networks were lifelines, built on trust. But what if trust was broken? What if a coward gave away the secret of a winter camp, or revealed the trail of a migrating tribe? Suddenly, the cycle wasn't just broken, it was destroyed. Because survival wasn't just about food, it was about timing. And timing depended on courage. Moving a camp required facing storms, crossing rivers, enduring hunger until the next hunt. One warrior's fear, his refusal to act, could delay the tribe, exposing them to starvation, ambush, or disaster. Think of it like gears in a clock. Every person was a gear, turning in sync with the others. Remove one, and the whole mechanism jammed. In the same way, one cowardly act could freeze the entire seasonal rhythm. And that is where our story tightens its grip. One man, one warrior, failed in the moment where courage was required. His fear wasn't just personal. It delayed the hunt, betrayed the people's movements, and shattered trust. The result? His cowardice didn't just break the rhythm of a season. It ended the song of his entire people. And in the next chapter, the climax will reveal exactly how this happened. How one act of fear erased a tribe from the earth, leaving only whispers in history. History is full of battles lost to numbers, to disease, to famine. But sometimes, it comes down to one man among the Pawnee. Kitcahawkee, known as the Republican Pawnee, there is a story that whispers through time. They were strong, skilled, and deeply connected to the buffalo herds. Their shelters stood firm, their traditions rich. But all it takes is one break in the chain, one season. As enemies pressed against them, the Pawnees stood ready. The tribe's hunters and warriors prepared for battle. Women and children gathered behind, trusting their protectors. At the center stood one warrior, a man who had sworn courage, who carried feathers of honor. He was expected to lead. But when the enemy charged, fear gripped him. He froze. Then, instead of standing firm, he turned. He ran. His flight was like a spark in dry grass. Others saw him flee. Panic spread. The line wavered. The enemy pressed harder. In moments, the Pawnees' defense collapsed. Families scattered. Food stores were lost. Camps burned. The warrior's cowardice didn't end with him. It infected his people. Where there had once been unity, there was now doubt. Where there had been trust, there was now betrayal. One act of fear had cracked the foundation of survival, and the result was catastrophic. Without unity, the tribe's seasonal hunts faltered. Without trust, alliances dissolved. Enemies grew bold. Within a generation, the Kitcahawkee were absorbed by others, erased as a distinct people. Their names survived in history, but their voice, their rhythm, their identity vanished. Think about it. An entire people lost not to famine, not to plague, but to one man's cowardice. The story of the cowardly warrior is not just tragedy, it's warning. The Pawnee knew that survival depended on courage, trust, and unity. When one man broke that bond, the result was more destructive than any weapon. His people carried the cost of his fear. And isn't that true for us today? Communities, families, even nations survive on trust. When leaders falter, when promises are broken, when cowardice replaces courage, collapse follows. But their story also carries hope. The Pawnee, like many tribes, taught that every choice ripples outward. A single act of fear can destroy, but a single act of courage can protect. In a world where betrayal is easy, courage is still the strongest survival skill we have. So perhaps the lesson of the cowardly warrior is this: don't be the one who runs. Be the one who stands. So now I ask you, if one warrior's cowardice could destroy his entire people, what could cowardice or courage do to us today? Could you stand firm if your family, your friends, your community depended on you? Or would fear win? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your voice. And if this story opened your eyes to the hidden lessons of Native American history, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Because next time, we'll uncover another forgotten story, one that just might change how you see the world.